Welcome back to Journalism 102. We've been working, of course, with text and video now, and we're going to start with the process of how to prepare text and video to work well online. And so your lecture today is all about writing for the web. So I often begin this discussion by just asking people to think about what it is that they want when they choose the online medium as their source of information. And almost always I get the same types of answers. People generally want some sort of on-demand type of information. So being able to go online anytime and finding the information that you want is a real advantage to the web. And so we need to think about what that means for the way that we write. In addition, people generally say, well, I go online because I want the very latest information. Because the web, of course, is not tied into the publication cycles of a television station or a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper. And they also like this idea of it being searchable. So being able to find exactly what it was that you want, and again, when you want it, with the very latest information provided. Now, there are probably a few other things that we could come up with if we were having a conversation about this. But I think that these three are probably the most commonly mentioned attributes of the web and what it is that online users like about it. And so all of that sort of speaks to this sort of summary of the online reader. This information is pulled from some of the writings of a guy by the name of Jacob Nielsen, who is a very smart and very well-known writer about web usability. And he says that online readers go to the web to get things done. They're solution hunting. So this is probably true, especially if they're looking for specific information. I know sometimes my husband actually appears to go online just to be online. So I guess in a way it is, he's seeking entertainment, right? So that's a solution. He wants to no longer be bored, so he's going online to seek a solution to his boredom. But when we're talking specifically about news, the online reader is looking for information that's comprehensive but specific. So what does that mean exactly? How can you be both comprehensive and specific? And so that's part of what we're going to talk about today is how do you provide all the information that the person who really wants to go deep on the story is going to need, as well as the very specific information that some people might be looking for. So say they only want to know one little tidbit about the story. That's all that interests them. So how do we serve both of those types of people in the same story? So you may have heard the expression WIFM before. That's an acronym for what's in it for me. A lot of times we talk about selfish online readers because this is really the medium in which people can satisfy very specific wants and desires related to information. The other thing that it's worth being aware of is that brevity is important online. So many of you receive feedback on your broadcast stories that related to the idea that shorter is better. And that continues online, despite the fact that really you have what we call a bottomless news hole online, which means you can go on and on and on and on with information online. But typically, research will show that about 20% of the content on a typical web page gets read and absorbed. So people aren't going to be looking at every single thing that you write. And so you need to make sure that there's an easy way for them to get the most important things that you write. So how does this change the writing for you as a journalist, trying to make sure that people get both that comprehensiveness that they're looking for online and the brevity and the very narrow specific information. So all of this leads us to sort of talk about things that work online. How can we make online writing sort of fit the needs of what people looking for information on the web are trying to do? So one of the things that it does in terms of changing the online writing style is it suggests and requires, I guess, that we write in short paragraphs. I think we talked previously about sort of the standard 1 to 2 sentence paragraph that we are starting to create in text. Well, that comes primarily from the web and the way in which you can help make a story look less intimidating to the reader by simply creating shorter paragraphs. You know, if there's actually a good example of how you can take the same information and put it all in very long 5 to 6 sentence paragraphs, and then take that same text and put it in 1 to 2 sentence paragraphs with white space in between each paragraph. And people will almost uniformly say that the story with more white space, essentially that open space between paragraphs or around images, that type of thing, the stories with more white space are less daunting, easier to consume. And so because of that, those short 1 to 2 sentence paragraphs really work well. In addition, bulleted lists. Now, this only works if you have a story that sort of lends itself to this. Maybe you're writing a piece about the Double-Decker Festival in Oxford, and you want to list where all of the music acts are going to take place. That's helpful and useful information for people, and it might make it even more attractive and easier to consume if you have that in a bulleted list. White space we just talked about, so white space is exactly that. How much unused space is there on the screen? And typically the more white space, the less intimidating your copy is going to look. In addition, we talked about sort of highlighted keywords, and really what we're talking about most often there is links. So, you know, to be comprehensive and specific, one of the things we can do is we can link to more information on particular issues related to our story. So a link adds depth without adding length. So it adds depth to your story without adding length. Subheads are a very important part of storytelling, especially for longer stories. So what you're doing with a subhead is you're breaking up the information that you have presented to the reader online into sort of subcategories. So one that I use often for an example is, you know, if you're writing a story about an upcoming election and you have a section on sort of the rules and regulations about how to get registered to vote. So you might put a subhead in, a little headline deeper in the story, and I'll show you an example of one in just a second, that helps readers find that specific information within the story. So subheads provide and create entry points for readers that don't want to read everything you've written about a story, but they want to read very specific information. It helps them find that specific information. The other thing about the online writing style is it tends to work best with that inverted pyramid. So remember we talked about the most important information coming first. That's really important online, and the reason inverted pyramid works so well online is that most of the time people are really wanting to get to the point to find out exactly what the story is about right off the bat. And so the inverted pyramid style lends itself to that sort of information seeking. So here's an example of some of the things that we were talking about. A story from a little bit better than a year ago, actually, about Illinois Governor Blagojevich guilty of corruption. And you see that they actually have a subhead or an opening paragraph that is used as a subhead underneath the headline. And this is a good example of maybe someone wants to know nothing more than the fact that this guy has been found guilty and what he's been found guilty of. So that satisfies that reader who really just wants a headline with a little bit more detail. You see the words personal gain. That's an example of a subhead. So that's breaking up the story into sections. Now, I'm not sure. I think that subhead is a particularly strong one, but it is an attempt to sort of show how the story is broken down into subcategories. So for people who want to know a lot more about this whole issue, you have links to related stories. Lone Blagojevich juror held out. Blagojevich found guilty of lying. So that's more information. If this story is really capturing your attention, you use those links to take you elsewhere in the story. And then you see just some bulleted information. So again, for somebody who's just trying to get the headlines here, the hits, runs, and errors, as a boss of mine used to say, then you provide that through this little bulleted list. So oftentimes on the web, and in fact for one of your assignments, you're going to be doing what's sort of called incremental reporting by some people. And that's offering the very latest information. This is often in a breaking news situation or in a developing story. So fairly recently when the National Signing Day took place, so football players, high school football players from all around the country were indicating where they were going to college. Incremental reporting worked really well on this particular day because we were getting information out as it happened. So we weren't necessarily writing full stories, but updating what was happening with signing day as we went along. Oftentimes this kind of reporting takes place when there's a big fire or a plane crash. Little pieces of information come out bit by bit, and then at the end you will write a story that sort of pulls the best of all that information together. But when you're doing incremental reporting, when you're trying to report a story as it happens, you want to stress the latest, what just happened. You will often get today or specific time references into your copy. And again, you want to get to the point right off the bat. So here's an example of a story that was ongoing and really contained a lot of incremental reporting. So the oil slick from the Deepwater Horizon explosion. This story was ongoing for days and days. So how do you keep that story updated when there are little teeny bits of information coming out constantly? So CNN.com has sort of adopted this way of adding information in a little story highlights box. And you see how they work to try to bring your attention to what's new information that you might not have seen before. So they actually use the word new. You'll see other sites using updated on their headlines. So they'll tell you if that story has been updated. Because again, one of the things that's driving online readers is this sense of it being the very latest on what happened. So the wind patterns out of the southeast, increasing likelihood that oil will come on shore, was a new piece of information, but according to the editors at CNN at the time, that wasn't enough to rewrite the current lead of the story, which was that the U.S. military could be called in. So this is a way for them to offer new information without changing the text of their story. Here's another example of what we were talking about. So this is a website out in Oklahoma. So they're giving their readers a sense of what is ahead that day. OU Medical Center will announce today. They say more details will be released at 1:30. This kind of reporting is very good. It's very urgent, but it also comes with a responsibility because the expectation of the audience is that there's going to be information about this story coming out shortly after 1:30, because you don't want this story to still be on the website at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By that time, the expectation is that you're going to have the details of what the announcement included. So what you're trying to do with incremental reporting is keep those updates coming. Make it easy for the viewer, for me, to see what's new in your story. And sort of answer the question to yourself, what's the user looking for now? What information can I add to this story that's going to satisfy that selfish online reader?